I'm Nathan Betts. Welcome to the next installment of the Revelation Reception Network seminar, Series 3, or Season 3, rather. Uh, in our apocalyptic seminar, we have it kind of like Friday the 13th, Part 3 or whatever. We have Series 3 here. And we're very pleased that today we are being joined by Lynn Huber to present some, I think, very exciting work, and exciting work especially for a group which historically has been focusing, not by intention, but simply by group makeup, on antiquity or late antiquity and medieval material. Today, as in Monty Python, now for something completely different. And it's wonderful. So, Lynn R. Huber is professor of religious studies at Elon University in Elon, North Carolina, in the USA. Not far from where I grew up, by the way, Lynn,
Oh,
where
cool.
her teaching focuses on the writings of early Christianity within the ancient Mediterranean world. Huber's scholarly work revolves around the book of Revelation, both in its historical context and as appropriated by subsequent interpreters, apocalyptic metaphor, and gender and sexuality in the ancient world. She is the author of Like a Bride Adorned, Reading Metaphor in John's Apocalypse, published in 2007, and Thinking and Seeing with Women in Revelation, published in 2013, and several book chapters and articles on Revelation's gendered imagery. She recently published a feminist commentary on Revelation as part of Liturgical Press's Wisdom Commentary series, a project she began with her late mentor, Dr. Gail R. O'Day. More information about Dr. Huber's work and her complete CV is available at lynnrhuber.com. Go there, but not right now. Stick around and pay attention to the talk. And Lynn, it's very nice to have you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And I'm really honored to be included. And there's so many names here of people that I know and whose work I admire. And so I'm really honored and just want to thank Nathan and Thomas and everyone associated with the Revelation Reception Network for this really cool forum that you have. I think it's exciting, and I've learned so much from the papers that I've heard so far as this year as part of in participating. So thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Um, and let's see. I was telling Nathan that we are in the midst of right here, in the midst of kind of a snow snowpocalypse, in the southeastern United States. And so, um, yeah, so I came into campus specifically so I could share this with you all, because I've been snowed in for the past week. Um, and I will just say that this work is kind of a new project, and I'll set it up a little bit in what I have for you today. So, I guess there's several depictions of the throne room scene from the book of Revelation that I share with students when I teach. And the first, let's see, is the famous watercolor by the English poet and artist William Blake, painted in the early 19th century. And the second image comes from an 18th century Ethiopian illuminated manuscript. When I display the images side by side and ask students to describe what they see and not just what they think these pictures illustrate, they rarely mention how figures in the illustration are gendered and racialized. I almost always have to prompt them to discuss race, in particular by asking, "What do you notice about skin color?" Other visual signifiers popularly associated with race, such as hair type, are similarly left unstated. And perhaps this is because many of my students are white, or maybe it reflects the fact that many people in, I think, American settings haven't been taught to talk about the Bible and race, let alone Revelation and race. So, a third image I show my students is by the self taught American artist from Alabama named Murtis West. And the painting underscores what those of us here today know quite well, and that's that John doesn't render the one on the throne in human terms. Instead, he uses gemstone imagery to convey his vision of the divine. West's painting follows John's description quite literally. Quote, the one seated there looks like jasper and carnelian, and around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. Revelation 4:3. So today I'm sharing a small portion of my current research project, which explores how Revelation's color imagery is interpreted in modern contexts in ways that valorize whiteness. And this is an attempt, albeit small, to rectify the tendency to bypass conversations about Revelation and race. So in this project, I highlight the role Revelation's millennial vision has played in creating racialized thinking and racism, and I situate the book's history of interpretation within the context of modern chromophobia, which includes assumptions about ancient people's ability or inability to actually perceive color, and the assumed aesthetic superiority of the color white. And that's a conversation that's happening a lot in classics around sort of polychrome art, as many of you know. And I'm happy to talk more about these ideas at the end. However, right now I want to focus on how John's depiction of the heavenly throne room, which is colorful in the text, is drained of color by interpreters and rendered as a kind of, quote, white mythic space. So, white mythic space is an idea articulated by historian and video game scholar Stefan Aguirre Quiroga, referring to how historical and pseudo-historical settings are remembered or reimagined as, quote, racially homogenous spaces in which non-white elements have been erased or minimized. So Quiroga developed this idea studying the racist backlash among white gamers over the first-person shooter video game Battlefield 1 set during World War I. Gamers' main grievance was that the game used non-customizable avatars, forcing them to play as black and brown characters, which they believed was historically inaccurate. Gamers exhibited a quote urgent need to defend the white mythic space that Battlefield 1's inclusions intruded upon, end quote, which they did in various ways, from posting racist memes in online forums to reporting black characters to game makers as bugs in the code to be fixed. The idea that World War I was primarily a white European war wasn't invented by these video gamers, however. It exists as part of an American and European collective memory about the war, cultivated over decades and reflective of the racial hierarchies at the heart of Euro-American thinking. This collective memory, Quiroga explains, is constructed through various means, including historical accounts, monumental public art, and more popular forms of storytelling, such as novels, movies, and even video games. Collective memory is so powerful that white mythic spaces effectively displace more historically accurate or defensible spaces that include people of color in the cultural imagination. And individuals and groups who benefit from these spaces go to extreme lengths to defend their perceptions. And this was evident to those of us living in the southeastern United States in 2017, when neo-Nazis and other white supremacists descended in Charlottesville, Virginia, to rally against the proposed removal of Confederate monuments. The event led to multiple injuries and even one death. And this is actually an image by one of my colleagues here at Elon who does photography at sort of local, following kind of local white supremacists. So my focus today is less on how people defend Revelation's white mythic space and more on how authors of commentaries and other interpreters, including those who produce Christian educational materials in the English language, construct the white mythic space of the throne room and install it in our collective memory. And I hope to just show a little bit about how this space is drained of its color, a move that allows interpreters to populate it with figures of evoking whiteness. So, before discussing how interpreters downplay Revelation's color, let's look at the heavenly throne room, which John first describes in chapter 4. I'm not going to read the text for you, you can read it for yourself. But looking over the text, it's easy to see why so many Revelation commentators describe Revelation as kaleidoscopic or painterly. And actually, a lot of commentaries describe Revelation as kaleidoscopic. Um, it's almost a trope of commentaries. So John references in this passage alone white, gold, red, green, light, and dark, even though he doesn't necessarily identify each color by name. He uses what we can describe as implicit color terms, nouns mostly, that evoke different hues without necessarily being specific color adjectives. These terms, moreover, evoke color's visual complexity and as ancient writers conveyed a variety of visual phenomena such as luster, brilliance, clarity, intensity, variegation, and even movement when referring to color. So, despite color imbuing this passage, scholars who talk about Revelations in the throne room and color in the throne room give most attention to verse 3 and John's use of gemstone and rainbow imagery to describe the one on the throne. So, that's where we're going to turn our attention. So, authors of ancient lapidaries, texts that outline the characteristics of stones and gemstones in particular, typically noted that jasper came in a variety of types and colors, such as brown and yellow, in addition to the more common green and red. Colors indicated a stone's power or purpose, a kind of sympathetic magic. Brown jasper, for instance, was believed to be beneficial for healing the kidney, while green jasper was thought to bring rain, making grass and plants green during a drought. Dark red likewise was associated with blood, making it valuable for childbirth. It was sometimes even thought of as hardened divine blood, which was also assumed to be the case with coral. While modern jasper is, or while we consider jasper generally opaque, some ancient writers suggested that stones classified as jasper could be translucent and even kind of clearish or have clear inclusions. For example, Dioscorides, the first century physician and naturalist, creates a memorable image when mentioning that jasper could appear like crystal that resembles phlegm, which could be clearish or yellow, depending on whether you have an infection or not, I suppose. But most references to ancient jasper generally note its color as red or green or brown or yellow. Carnelian, sardion in Greek, refers to stones that are red or reddish orange and generally somewhat translucent, meaning light shines through them, as in these examples. Theophrastus noted that carnelian could be more opaque, which he associated with masculinity, or translucent, but even redder in color, which he understood as indicating that the stone had feminine qualities. Either way, carnelian's color and ability to fit its color is almost always associated with red. And its ability to filter light really made it a desirable stone for jewelry and intaglio carving. So, unlike modern Newtonian theories, as many of you know, color perception in the ancient world was understood in terms of the eye's physical interaction with color as a material. Color was indicative of a thing's physical properties. And we can talk later if you want about like ancient theories of sight. They're fascinating. I love talking about those. But color was really indicative of a thing's physical properties, whether that was the basic elements that made up an object, fire, water, air, or earth, or the surface of an object's atoms, whether they were rough or smooth. The eye felt those things. And color revealed something about the very nature of the seen object. So, John's use of color imagery to describe the one on the throne communicated really specific theological claims and things he believed about the nature of the divine, things that could be experienced visually. And almost physically to a viewer. And this idea comes across in Ecumenicus's commentary on Revelation, written in the 6th or 7th century. Um, Again, I know most of you are familiar with this, but when he talks about the throne room, he often offers this lengthy quotation where he writes, "Therefore, God was not seen to be like anything, but it was from the acts of God that the vision was depicted in Revelation. So, for jasper, which is a precious stone, looks like emerald and is green, resembling an aps's poison, from which it also derives its name. Carnelian is another precious stone, fiery, bright, and blood red. Jasper signifies for us God's ability to give life and to provide for our needs, since every nourishment of human beings and four-footed animals and birds and reptiles has its source and thus its cause originating from green plants. For the prophet says he causes grass to grow for the cattle and green plants for the service of men, so as to bring food from the earth. But by carnelian, he describes the awe of God, for our God is a devouring fire, says the Hierophant Moses. So Ecumenicus's reading assumes that John's use of the gemstone imagery might not be talking about the sort of physical nature of the divine, but that it reveals essential truths about the character and nature of God. The passage's colors are essential because they communicate theological meaning. So, when thinking about color on the one on the throne, the rainbow surrounding the divine might seem like a key image. In fact, the rainbow around the throne gets featured in many popular depictions of the throne room, such as this painting from Blake. However, our idea that the rainbow consists of 7 visible colors is an idea we inherited from Newton. Ancient thinkers ascribed a more limited palette to rainbows. According to Aristotle, for example, rainbows were composed of 3 basic colors, red, green, and violet or blue, an idea adopted by some late antique and early medieval artists. Rainbows, more importantly, are understood as reflections emerging from a combination of light and dark in ancient thought. Rainbows appear in the sky because the sun's reflection of light on the dark moisture found in clouds. And this view aligns, moreover, with both Aristotle's and Empedocles' understanding of color variation. For them, all color was a mixture of light and dark or white and black. The colors of the rainbow result from this interplay of light and dark. Thus, while one might imagine the rainbow around the throne as indicative of the light within the throne room, including flashes of lightning and the 7 torches before the throne, the rainbow also signals the presence of darkness. Perhaps this is on account of the sea before the throne, as water was traditionally associated with the color black or darkness. And John's description of the sea as crystal or glass-like, I think it's important to recognize, doesn't preclude it from being dark, as both crystal and glass came in an array of colors in antiquity. So the throne room is full of color, but it's sort of a complexly colored space. It's not. It evokes many aspects of ancient color theory. And John's comparison to the rainbow to an emerald also implies light, as ancient thinkers such as Theophrastus considered this characteristic of emeralds. When placed in water, the philosopher explained, an emerald makes the water appear green. So, in this vein, David de Silva argues that the rainbow around the throne should probably be understood more like a green halo of light emanating from the throne. So, it's light, but it's light with color. Emeralds, jasper, and carnelian were all frequently used in Roman era intaglios, engraved gemstones, set in gold rings, or other jewelry pieces. And the subjects of these intricate engravings were often deities, including Jupiter and other sky gods. However, as Joran Oakland notes, instead of depicting God on a precious stone, John presents God as or like a gemstone. It's somewhat of a distinction. The depictions of ancient gods, in fact, often evoked the color of gems. One of John's immediate references for the image of the one on the throne is a vision of the prophet Ezekiel. In the midst of a sapphire-colored throne, the prophet saw, quote, something like a human form who appears similar to gleaming amber. The word translated as amber is sometimes rendered as burning metal, although early Christian commentators on Ezekiel, such as Jerome, explains that whatever the substance the word might evoke, the color was gold. And gold, we know, was often used to adorn the deities in cult statues that John's audience would have seen in their day-to-day lives, such as this relief of Mithras. John hints at this when he disparages the fact that people worshiped idols of gold and silver and bronze and stone and wood. Gods could also have white, red, and blue features, or even be black. Although this one is bronze with a dark patina, the original wooden statue of Artemis of Ephesus was made of wood that appeared black, either ebony, according to Pliny, or cypress that had been oiled to a dark sheen. Um, and I could go on and say more about the colors of deities, but I think it's important to kind of underscore that since the deities of the ancient Mediterranean were colorful, it's not surprising that John's vision of the one on the throne is full of color as well. So here's where we shift. Since there's a long history of depicting Revelation's throne scene and the one on there is a long history of depicting Revelation's throne room and the one on the throne. And as many of you know, these appear throughout church decorative programs and illuminated manuscripts. However, in this project, I'm examining illustrated Bibles published in the modern American context, given their popularity, or in English speaking context, given their popularity and their potential to convey specific theological and ideological messages under the guise of education, edification, and entertainment. So the Harper's Illuminated and New Pictorial Bible, it was published between 1843 and 1846 and was one of the most popular English language illustrated Bibles of the 19th century. It was released as a series in 54 parts, so people could subscribe to the series, and then they would have it bound when it was complete. And it was a huge hit, and it was released numerous times, and the full volume itself was printed multiple times. So, in addition to full page illustrations, the Harper's includes many small images alongside of the text, such as the case with the throne room of Revelation 4. When it comes to this scene, we only get to peek into this space as though we are looking through the door John used to enter heaven. In the visible figures, 6 of the 24 elders sit on backless thrones wearing long white robes. They have very long beards suggesting age, and their faces are white. They could easily be mistaken for Norse gods with their long beards and their crowns. The elders facing the viewer are lightly drawn in a way that implies a glowing light coming from God's throne. Likewise, the backs of the elders in the side view are dark, presumably because everything outside of the circle is dark. So even though Harper's resists depicting God in the divine throne, the viewer knows that God emits bright, maybe white, light. In some senses, captures the idea I mentioned when talking about the rainbow, that the throne room is imbued with light and dark, white and black. So this is a unique example, but more common in illustrated Bibles, both in European and American contexts, are depictions that actually anthropomorphize and depict the one on the throne, and depict the one on the throne as white. So one of the most popular series of the 19th century was a series of Bible illustrations that they were sold as part of Bibles, but also separate from the text so that people could collect them. And I'm guessing many of you have seen this before. This is by Julius Schnorr von Karlsfeld, a German painter and illustrator. And Schnorr's illustration of the seven seals offers a glimpse into the heavenly throne room, including just a brief, a sort of glimpse of the one on the throne, as the action unleashed by the opening of the seals consumes the foreground. The one on the throne, not just the elders, is depicted as a human male. His skin and hair are white, and his features lack shading in comparison to other figures. The world's darkness and chaos frame the lightness and whiteness of heaven, which appears quite tranquil in comparison to what's happening in the foreground. So, and again, these are just a couple examples. I could give you more, but just a glimpse. So, more contemporary illustrated Bibles often are written for children as their primary audience. And I don't know why people think that children should have bad art, but it seems like that's the case. Um, and even though these are for children, some within the industry admit that these Bibles simultaneously present the Word of God to adults who read the highly edited stories to their children. So they may look like they're mainly for children, but they do see themselves as reaching a broader audience. So this is published in 2005. And this is the Beginner's Bible, and it presents Bible stories for preschool age children, and it does strive to depict racial and ethnic diversity. The Beginner's Bible is an immensely popular title published by Zondervan, and it sold over 5 million copies worldwide. The publisher's website claims that it is the most popular Bible storybook of our time, and it might arguably be. Although, again, it's not the most artistically interesting Bible on the market. Its reach is considerable, though. So, as with many children's Bible, Revelation is considerably condensed, as you might imagine. But it does include the illustration of the one on the throne, and not all of them do. More children's Bibles are likely to include images of the vision of the Son of Man instead of the one on the throne. But looking through the doors of heaven, along with John, the viewer sees the one on the throne as a human form, bright white and surrounded by this pale yellow glow. We're given a sense of a beard. It's a simplistic rendering, but it makes clear that God is embodied and is male and white. And again, similar renderings can be found in a variety of children's Bible. This is just one example. It was originally published in Germany, but was republished by Liturgical Press in 1959 and has had other uh, uh, editions. Um, this is also kind of common. This is also kind of rendition. Often the one on the throne is also depicted not just as white, but also wearing white, kind of along the same lines as like the martyrs or others wearing white in Revelation. And often the figure is is very Jesus-like, kind of like we see in church art, from medieval and early modern church art, where God and Jesus bear resemblance. So, another version of the throne room, again from an American context, but designed for teens and young adults, appears in this 2020 comic book version of Revelation, published by Kingstone Comics. And as you see, the one on the throne again appears as kind of a white light. It's right in the fold, so unfortunately, we don't get a full view of the figure. Um, and this image, I'm sharing this because if you Google throne room scene Revelation and you look at the Google images, many of which are AI generated nowadays, this is very typical of what you see. This is a very kind of common way of rendering the throne room. And the white light flows towards the elders, whose face all shine with white light as well. They reflect back, which I think makes sense theologically. Darkness encroaches from the sides. The company that produces this is Baptist, and it prides itself on scriptural accuracy, which I think is interesting. Increasingly, Christian publishing houses such as Crossway and an evangelical Christian company are producing digital and streaming content in addition to print Bibles, such as The Biggest Story. This multimedia curriculum includes animated short videos, all available for free on YouTube, depicting the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. In the video version of Revelation, a soft-spoken narrator with an English accent explains that, because I think English accents are deemed as authoritative, maybe in the United States, does not see the face of God because God cannot be seen. Instead, the viewer sees this faceless, human-like figure sitting on a red throne with a patterned background of vibrant jewel tones surrounding the figure. However, the figure remains predominantly white, save for this image in the middle, which in the video version, it goes these three circles kind of, or globes, um, sort of go out and come in. There's movement, which is kind of suggestive of the Trinity. And then there are these sort of images, light green waves, which kind of give a cascading effect, suggesting water. The narrator explains that a rainbow surrounds this throne, but there's no mention in this version that the one on the throne appears like jasper and carnelian, even though the illustrator clearly likes gemstone colors. Finally, Apocalypse Animated was released in 2020, and it's a rendition of Revelation by American artist Nina Paley, who animated the award-winning movie Sita Sings the Blues in 2009. Paley is very problematic for some, in particular, her ideas about sort of transgender individuals. Puts her in a category that many of us who do like queer interpretation, um, often we don't like to like engage her work, but I think you just can't. This is such a kind of powerful image. I can't let it go. Um, Paley was raised Jewish, now identifies as an atheist, so her work isn't meant as Christian educational material. But her image of the one on the throne, which has the divine as this white cube, I think reveals how pervasive the connection is between whiteness and the throne room. Paley avoids anthropomorphism, but the faceted figure who occupies the space is transparent and white. Um, and I guess I'm going to go back. Illustrations of Revelation's throne room often highlight the color around the throne, but the one on the throne, the most crucial figure in the text, is essentially portrayed as white in terms of light. And this is an interesting reversal of the text itself, where the rainbow in ancient thinking might not be as vibrantly colored as we think about it today, and yet the one on the throne is this carnelian and jasper. So, an example of how the whiteness upon the one on the throne is extended and extended in ways that support whiteness or valorize whiteness can be seen in this poem from a religious tract intended for children, published in around the turn of the 20th century. And this is a popular kind of series of tracts. Here in this poem, there are faithful children who surround God in the throne room, and the throne room is bright and fair, and the children are characterized specifically as white and clean. While one might argue whiteness should be understood metaphorically, it's not unequivocal, and the association between the color white and moral purity really has historically fueled anti-Black racism. So, since I began this presentation by underscoring the color of the one on the throne room, we might think it's strange that these illustrations depict the figure in human form and in terms of whiteness. However, if we look at commentaries on Revelation, we often see, somewhat surprisingly, I think, similar impulses towards whiteness and depicting the one on the throne as white. While turning to John's description of the one on the throne as jasper and carnelian, authors of Revelation commentaries frequently note the difficult inherent in interpreting these terms. Ancient authors, for instance, are inconsistent in their use of these terms, and we can't always assume that their ideas about stones align with modern assumptions about stone types. So sometimes like carnelian or jasper are used what we might think of as willy-nilly in antiquity. At the same time, commentators move quickly from making this observation to raising the possibility that jasper in particular in Revelation could be transparent, which is often seemingly acquainted with being clear or colorless. So one such scholar is Robert Mounce, whose popular 1977 commentary was revised in 1995 and remains widely consulted to this day. I know I've consulted it. I'm sure a lot of us have. Of the throne room, Mounce writes, quote, identification of the three stones, jasper, carnelian, and emerald, is somewhat uncertain. Since modern jasper is opaque, many interpret the ancient stones as translucent rock crystal. In 2111, it's said to be clear as crystal, perhaps a diamond. The carnelian was a blood red stone named after Sardis, near where it was found. And if the rainbow that surrounded the throne was a halo, then the emerald is usually pictured as green. Otherwise, it is a colorless crystal that refracts a rainbow of prismatic colors. So in this passage, Mounce really vacillates on the color, privileging the idea that the one on the throne is colorless. First, jasper may be opaque, but should be read as translucent and crystal. Perhaps it alludes to a diamond, a stone idealized for its colorless and clarity, even though John does not use the Greek word for diamond. Again, while he acknowledges that the emerald is typically green, Mounce also introduces the idea that it can be colorless. He mentions the red of the carnelian quickly, among other references to colorness, effectively, I think, diminishing the color of the passage. So the reference to 2111 is something many Revelation commentators note when talking about this verse. Near the end of his vision, John views the New Jerusalem descending from heaven and observes that, quote, it has the glory of God and a radiance like a very rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal, end quote. The phrase clear as crystal is how most modern English translations of Revelation render the Greek adjective kryllostidzo. This is not a common word, but it refers to something being like crystal and doesn't necessarily mean colorless, which is something that Auni points out. However, in an apparent attempt to explain what John means by the word crystal, in English translations, the word clear is added. In fact, the Greek text here could, but does not use the more common word for clear or transparent, diaphanes. Still, even though it's not actually in the Greek, the use of clear in modern English versions of 2111 results in scholars asserting that the jasper in 4:3 is clear. The insistence of this instance of interpretive acrobatics, which skips ahead 17 chapters to interpret a relatively straightforward term, appears in numerous Revelation commentaries. And this is just a sampling across the past 40 years and types of commentaries. At the top is Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza. Here we have Craig Keener. And then recently here we have a commentary from 2011 by Robert Gundry, who offers, since 2111 describes a jasper stone sparkling like crystal, like a jasper stone here in 4:3, may mean that the one sitting on the throne was sparkling like a diamond. He goes so far as to say, quote, a carnelian is red, but John makes nothing of its color, nor of the green color of an emerald. Those gemstones simply combine to highlight the glory of God and his throne. I'll note that some commentators simply observe that jasper and carnelian are associated with the priestly breastplate described in Exodus, or that these are precious stones evoking splendor and light. Not all commentators go to um, go to these lengths. However, color is often left out of the discussion, or colorlessness is highlighted in discussions of this text, even though this is John's description of God. Beasley Murray also homes in on the possibility of jasper being transparent, and he goes one step further in his commentary, initially published in 1974 and re-released in 2010. And this is what he writes. The appearance of God was jasper and carnelian. The former could vary in appearance from a dull yellow to a red or a green or even translucent like glass, as apparently in 2111. In view of the latter passage, we may take the last to be in view. Carnelian or sardius, originating from Sardis, was red. The divine appearance was, as it were, white and red. Yes, Beasley Murray mentions the red of carnelian and applies it to the divine. Still, his explicit equation of transparency with whiteness underscores a point I'm trying to make, that failing to account for the complex colors evoked in John's description of the one on the throne potentially contributes to a picture of God as white. Another way that the throne room becomes colorless is by emphasizing the light of the throne room rather than noting its colors. Um, in the Sacropagina commentary on Revelation, Harrington suggests, for example, that John's room vision simply conveys the impression of dazzling light, brightness that at once shows and hides the presence of God. And Gregory Beale connects Jasper's in 4:3 with divine glory, since John compares God's glory to Jasper in 21:11. He argues that, quote, the stones intensify the light around the throne by reflecting the unapproachable brightness and hence glory surrounding God himself. So, in some cases, we don't see discussions of color, we see discussions of light. And I'm running short of time, so I'll just note that this is also where kind of attention to ancient color theory and how ancient understandings of color are different than modern is important, since modern ideas of light is as since modern understandings of light associates it with whiteness and with white. According to Newton, light is composed of all the colors. And so we tend to think of light and whiteness. Um, Semiotics and color expert Jose Luis Caviano observes that modern people often think of white, moreover, as an absence of color. So we tend to think of light equals white, but we also think of white equaling absence of color. And this idea comes from the mixing of pigments. We imagine the color black as a mixture of many pigments, while white is a kind of base to which color is added. The idea that white is somehow colorless, for instance, undergirds Beasley Murray's comment mentioned above that the divine appearance in Revelation is at least in part transparent white. So there's so much more that I could say about this. But I hope, and this is just the beginning, but I hope that you have some sense of how Revelation is used to foster an image of God as one who was white, or associated with frequent references to the one on the throne as a kind of light source. Um, there are exceptions to this association of the one on the throne with whiteness. The Ethiopian manuscript points to this, but the rarity of these kinds of images within American and European imagination is striking. These representations matter, especially as Revelation gets used to shape how Christians, especially in English-speaking contexts like the US, understand power and what it means to be a follower of God. And I'll just stop there since we're about out of time. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Lynn. A round of virtual Zoom applause is ascending even now. Thanks. It's rather, I think Zoom's animations of applause is getting more extravagant, at least on my end. So anyway, it was a really, really engaging talk. It hits a number of very interesting bells and a lot of evocations of some really interesting things. I myself have 8 questions, but let's begin with anyone else who has a question or a comment. I was speaking with Lynn just before, and I think she mentioned this at the beginning of her presentation, that this is, in a sense, a representation of a manuscript in its creative phase. So
Yeah.
I think she would welcome real engagement and conversation and pointing out things that would be of use to her in the writing phase, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken. Yeah,
that is true.
right. So, Michelle Fletcher, very nice to have you here. Please ask the first question.
Hi, thanks so much, Lynn. That was totally awesome. Really, really enjoyed that. I, like Nathan, have millions of questions, but I won't take too much. I'll just go through 3 really quickly. The first one is just about the inheritance of the German print culture that you kind of showed in the American Bibles, and that sense that obviously they are playing with light and dark as the medium about how to be able to convey the images. But that's so clearly moving through from that early German Protestant print culture.
Yes, definitely.
So that is an iconographic one. The second one with the white light I was interested in is the people are bringing, I would say, the transfiguration together with that idea of Jesus becoming white, and in Mark, whiter than any fuller can make. So I wonder if there's some sort of bringing together there that people are, it's in the interpretation, and the idea of something being divine as being really, really white, because that's how Jesus gets. So the one on the throne is Jesus-ish, God, Jesus, all being put together. So
can I so I see that really in the image of the one like the Son of Man. Commentaries in particular will make the connection between that image in Revelation 1 and the Transfiguration. And then I do think it then gets moved into into later parts of Revelation. But that's so explicit in how people talk about Revelation 1.
It's interesting because it seems like the iconographic tradition is absorbing that. So in the unsaid sort of ways that people are understanding something, you put it in a picture and it's divine, therefore it's shining white, like light. And so you'll be aware of this as well, but what was coming out for me was the Protestantness of it all, which comes from that German print culture with the absence of color. So when I've been on guided tours around St. Paul's Cathedral, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the inside, but the nave is kind of the white renniness, and then you move into those later mosaics, which are based on Ravenna. And when I've been there, people are like, oh, but obviously this is the really nice bit with the nave, because of the Protestant mindset of the sort of colored imagery being problematic. And so even though they're based on Ravenna, which are those early Christian, colorful, divine, not even gold images, there's this iconographic tradition that means that that absence of color is seen to be more divine through that movement. So I suppose I was just thinking about all of those things together with what you were saying, with the inheritance that's then popping out in those Bibles and in the commentators, because how many of those, I was going through the names when you were saying them, are evangelical, where that is part of their cultural understanding of a white church that doesn't have lots of colorful things on it. So I'll shut up now, but thank you.
No, that's all really helpful. And I do have, so I guess most of the examples I gave were Protestant, and I did cut like a Catholic American Bible, not Bible, but instructional book, a study book on like the history of the Bible, which includes some imagery that I should have shared. I am trying to get some diversity. So, like in terms of Catholic Protestant readings of Revelation, so like Harrington, for instance. But it is interesting to see how the Protestant print tradition, like you notice, that German Protestant block print Bible, like Durer set the standard, and then after that, like nobody else can do anything differently. It really is influential. Yeah, and I, like when I started this project, I was like going all the way back to, the sort of earliest representations of this image, and I kind of had to stop. But it's deep.
Oh, it's great. Thank you. It's really, really interesting. I look forward to seeing how it grows. Thanks so much. I'll let others ask questions.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the question and the engagement. David Armstrong Reiner, it's very nice to have you here. Question, please.
Hey, Lynn. I figure I better get a question in with my colleague from Emory. So, Lynn, you mentioned a little bit on this, and I find it very interesting that what has happened is the figure on the throne has kind of morphed into that Son of Man figure in Revelation 1, especially in some of the pictorial things. Just out of curiosity, as you've done your research, is that more of a kind of post-Durer sort of thing, or do you see any of that in any early interpretations that might have led to that association of the Son of Man figure with the one on the throne?
That's a good question. And I mean, and I don't know how to answer it. I mean, I think we see, and I think that this goes back to what kind of Michelle was saying a little bit, is that we really see the influence of iconography, I think, on interpretation, because in iconography, sorry, my phone is ringing all of a sudden. When we see like images of the throne room in like depicted in church art, it's often images of the divine are often look like images of Christ. And so there is this kind of blending that happens in iconography, and it seems like that also then happens in not just general representations of the throne room, but you see that in sort of interpretations, specifically renderings of Revelation as well. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's what I have right now. Yeah, and I see Dr. Matter unmuting herself, and she would be probably the person who could help us with that.
I do have a question, but it's a slightly different question. This was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. But I noticed you began talking about gender and race.
Oh, yeah.
But you didn't say very much about gender.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that. The thought I had was that the carnelian is somehow female-ish, but in medieval color iconography, red is a male color, even to the point that men wore pink. Women didn't wear pink. And so can you trace anything about males and females through the color iconography?
You can. And I have kind of avoided gender in this presentation, which is odd since almost everything else I do is about gender.
I know.
But Theophrastus does sort of gender gemstones in ways that are interesting. And I mean, that has to do with like, hardness and porousness, which, as you know, are connected to gender. So yeah, deep dark carnelian would be associated more with masculinity, whereas he would say kind of more translucent lightness would be associated with femininity. So there are things going on with gender and color there. And I've kind of sidestepped it here. But I think, as you're pointing out, it's you can't really sidestep gender.
Well, it's so fascinating because I've never noticed anybody talking about gender particularly about the book of Revelation at all.
Mm.
So,
yeah,
I mean, maybe I've missed something because I don't know all the New Testament commentaries.
yeah. Um, there is a rich conversation about gender and sex and revelation. And I know Michelle has published on that. I've published on that. Um, and yeah, we have a lot of people who are doing work on that. Although it doesn't necessarily get picked up in more traditional um commentary conversations. We're not often not cited. So
Good. Thank you, Anne, for the intervention there. Any other questions from anyone else who is here? Otherwise, I warn you, I will ask mine. Valerie Nicolay, go ahead.
I have just a quick comment that I'm sure that you know about this, but since we talked about diversity and Protestant, Catholic, etc., first of all, thank you. It's super interesting. But I'm thinking I haven't been able to find it, but it might be you could maybe look at the huge tapestry in Angers. That's
yes,
very, very colorful in
yeah,
general. I'm not sure if there is an illustration of the throne room because some are missing and maybe but this could be a place for some Catholic diversity and royal,
yeah.
all the power issues. Yeah, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that.
I haven't. I'll have to look back. I have. So Valerie, David, and I all went to Emory together, and went to graduate school together. And back in the day, I did a archive of images for our colleague Carol Newsom, or our instructor Carol Newsom. And I did collect all of the images of the tapestry as part of the collection of apocalyptic art I put together back in the 90s. So I need to go back and look at that.
Okay. I have the book. I'll check. If I
Okay,
if I find
yeah,
it, I'll
yeah,
email you.
yeah, yeah.
Good. Well, to follow up on that question, a few of these questions kind of touch on um, the thought of continuity, and if we see an increasing whitening of the throne room, or you just, I'm also thinking of a lot of the Beatus manuscripts, and
Mhm.
if we see any trends or chronological tendencies of whitening, de-whitening of this throne room scene, do we see any changes over time that are maybe reflect geographically or politically? If there's maybe anything you could say on that head.
Yeah, so I thank you for that question. And I will say, so I am really looking at so I'm looking at sort of how the text means in its historical context, but then looking at kind of I'm not contemporary, modern interpretations, um, because of and actually not trying not to look more at medieval,
Mhm.
in part because I want to think about how these texts are used in sort of post-racial, post-racial thinking context. So the Beatus and other examples are really, before we start to think of black and white in terms of racial identities. And I know that there's ideas of proto-racism in antiquity, and people are thinking about color and skin in antiquity in ways that anticipate modern racism. But I am really trying to think about how these texts um, are used in these more modern contexts where we're thinking about race and racism. So yeah, if you look at the Beatus, I mean, you see these vibrant, beautiful, colorful throne rooms. Um, and we do see colorful throne rooms in modern depictions as well. It's just the one on the throne
Yeah.
gets drained of color, as well as those who surround the throne. So it becomes the room becomes colorful, but the people inhabiting the room become primarily white. And again, there are exceptions. And there are exceptions to reading the one like the Son of Man as an entirely white figure. There are theological arguments. Black theologians have argued for the one like the Son of Man as an image of blackness. There's a really famous 1970s TV show called Good Times too, that makes a reading of that uses the book of Revelation to argue for the importance of a Black Jesus figure. And it's based upon some readings of Revelation from the Black liberation movement of the Black Power movement of the 1960s and 70s. So there are some readings that are offering alternative ways of understanding Revelation.
Excellent. Well, I think just because of time, we have to end the conversation here, but I have a suggestion. If any of you, like me, have kind of jotted down questions, observations, bibliography, or anything, I wonder if you have Lynn's email address, just take a picture of it, send it to her, or something like that. Or if you don't have her address, send it to me. I'll forward it. Any of the emails or social media or anything, get in touch with me. I'd be very happy to forward it on to Lynn. Maybe we should always do that if people have time. I think it could be very helpful. Again, let's thank Lynn once again for her participation and for coming on to face the music, as it were. Yes. I think we'll leave it there. I simply want to remind everyone else that if you liked this, come back next month for another exciting episode. We'll be featuring Katarina Poulsen from Lund University. She will be talking about the church and the end, Jerome on judgment and pastoral responsibility, so back to late antiquity. That will be March the 5th, once again on a Thursday. And then April the 2nd, we'll be back to the 20th century. Sam Pomeroy at the University of Tennessee will be talking about Eric Peterson and Carl Ludwig Schmidt on the Heavenly Jerusalem. And there will be more later in the season, but that will be March 5th and April 2nd, both at 11 a.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Germany time on the first Thursdays of March and April, respectively. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Really look forward to seeing you again. And again, if you have any comments or anything, please send them to Lynn or send them to me and I will forward them. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lynn. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.